Life on a rocky shore. Life on a rocky shore. Down by the shore. The seashore is always changing. Waves roll in and crash on the shore. The water sweeps up onto the beach and then flows back out again. At some times during the day, the water comes up higher on the beach than at other times. When the water is at its highest, we say it is high tide. When the water is at its lowest, we call that low tide. At high tide, much of the beach is covered by water. At low tide, you can see more of the shore. Along a rocky shore, rocks that were covered by water are uncovered. Pools of water remain in between rocky and sandy hollows in the rocks. These pools of leftover seawater are called tide pools. This whole area is called the intertidal zone, or between the tide zone. The intertidal zone is teeming with sturdy little animals and hardy seaweed. All these living things manage to thrive in a habitat where life isn't so easy. Barnacles cling to the tide pool rocks, crabs scurry along the shore, seaweed sways in the water. They all have their own ways of surviving crashing waves and changing tides. Creatures that stick. You might wonder how creatures on the shore manage to stick around their homes even though waves are rushing in and out all day. Why don't they get swept out to sea? The answer is that some of them really do stick. The barnacle is one example. A young barnacle finds a nice rock to settle down on. Then it glues itself there for life. It makes a tough, gluey cement that helps it stick tight. Like barnacles, blue mussels fight crashing waves by hanging on. What makes mussels really good clingers is the stringy liquid they make. This liquid hardens into tough threads when it touches seawater. Mussels use the threads to hold on to rocks. When the tides come in, mussels keep their shells open a little to let in food and water. When the tide goes out, they shut their shells tightly to keep their bodies from drying out in the sun. The limpet is a small snail. The animal hides in a soft body under a cone-shaped shell. It uses its strong, sticky foot to attach itself tightly to a rock. Some limpets actually grind a groove for themselves right into the rock. The strongest waves can't knock them off. The limpet slides away from its spot only to feed, and it always returns to the same spot. Sea urchins don't make glue or sticky threads. Instead, they wedge their spines down into cracks and spaces between the rocks. Their sucker-like feet help them stay in place at high tide, and in their moist hiding places, their bodies don't dry out in the baking sun at low tide. Slippery seaweeds. Animals aren't the only things living in the intertidal zone. Seaweeds in many colors, shapes, and sizes also survive and thrive there. They look like plants, but they're not. They are called marine algae. Unlike plants, seaweeds don't have roots to hold them in place, but many seaweeds, including rockweed and kelp, have holdfasts that keep them from being washed out to sea. A holdfast is a seaweed's bottom part, which wraps around rocks, other seaweed, and even shellfish. Some seaweeds don't have sturdy stems either, but they do have other features that hold them up. Some have hollow branches and air bladders, tiny balloons filled with air that float up near the water's surface. There, the seaweed gets closer to the sunlight it needs to make food. Like plants, seaweeds make their own food using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, a gas found in both air and water. When the tide goes out, seaweed along the shore can no longer float. It collapses into clumps on the shore. The seaweed may look dead, but it's usually just waiting for the next tide to come in. Clumps of seaweed don't dry out easily, even when the tide is all the way out. They hold in moisture so well that baby crabs, shrimps, snails, and small fish nestle inside the clumps. These creatures hide themselves underneath the seaweed to keep moist until the tide comes back in. Green, brown, and red. Seaweeds are divided into three types: green, brown, and red. Green algae are the color of grass. They sometimes look ruffly or lacy. Brown algae are gooey and slimy. Sometimes they grow so thick they make underwater forests. Red algae are often attached to rocks, to other plants, or to animals. They come in many different shapes and sizes. Seaweeds are important because they provide food and shelter for animals. Also, like plants, they give off oxygen, which all animals need to survive. Finding food. Life in the intertidal zone is a struggle to stay in its place to stay moist. It's also a struggle for food. Animals that have the easiest time finding food are the filter feeders and grazers. Filter feeders, including mussels and barnacles, eat by taking in water and straining out microscopic plants and animals called plankton. The limpet is a grazer. It uses its long, rough-edged tongue to scrape the rocks for its food, slimy algae. While some animals don't have trouble finding food, they do have to keep from being food. For example, sea otters kill and eat sea urchins, but sea urchins' prickly spines discourage other predators from attacking them. The blue mussel is eaten by another shelled animal called the dog whelk. The whelk drills a hole right through the mussel's shell to reach its dinner. Some blue mussels have extra thick shells that protect them. The whelks leave these mussels alone. The sea star, also called a starfish, is so pretty. It's hard to believe that it is a fierce killer. Its strong, sucker-covered arms are powerful weapons against the shellfish it eats, mainly clams, oysters, and mussels. First, the sea star wraps its arms around a shellfish and attaches its sucker to the shell. Then the sea star's arms begin to pull the shells apart. It doesn't take long for the shells to open just a crack. That's when the sea star goes in for the kill. It throws its stomach out through its mouth and into the opening. Then it digests the shellfish's soft body. Sea anemones have tentacles that weave back and forth in the water. Small fish are attracted to them, but the tentacles have a powerful sting. When an animal is stung, it can't move. The tentacles push the helpless prey into the anemone's mouth to be eaten. Crabs are amongst the largest animals in the intertidal zone. They have special features that help them survive. They can move around easily to chase down their prey. They use their sharp pincers to catch and tear apart shellfish and other small animals. Larger animals such as seagulls hunt crabs. The crab's shellfish protects them. Sometimes, of course, they get eaten anyway. The tiny hermit crab is a scavenger. It eats scraps of dead plants and animals left behind by other animals. The hermit crab likes leftovers when it comes to its home too. This animal has no shell to protect its body, so how does it survive? As soon as it's born, it searches for an empty shell, such as a snail shell. When it finds one, the hermit crab twists its soft body backward into it. A close look. A rocky shore is always changing. It isn't really land, and it really isn't really sea. It can be both, depending on whether the tide is in or out. If you visit a rocky shore at low tide, you'll have a chance to take a close look at the living things there. Be on the lookout for limpets. Try to spot a sea star or a sea urchin. See how many different kinds of seaweed you can find. Take some time to watch and think about this amazing world between the tides.